Hi, and welcome back. In our last session, we learned how to improve soil, whether we were converting lawn to a garden or starting with an old bed. Then we changed up our designs based on plant availability and how those plants actually look together. In this session, we'll visit our small space garden and we'll look at how we can solve problems. We'll look at light and water, microclimates, and how they affect the garden. And we'll keep all this in mind as we design. So let's head over to our small space and get started now. We've sketched out the area, and as you can see, we've removed the plants that aren't working, and we've left those we want to include in our new landscape design. Now, we have a few problems that we're going to take a little time to solve. Rather than do a quick fix, we decided to look for a more permanent solution. And when we started shopping for plants, we found not everything was available. So we're going to be adding to our design throughout the growing season. I also wanted to include a few seasonal interests. That's one of the advantages of a small space. You can change out the plants at very little cost to have changes throughout the season for you to enjoy and look forward to. Now, we do have challenges in each corner that are a little bit different, and many of them you can relate to and perhaps will help you solve those problems in your own backyard. This garden has brought lots of pleasure to the homeowner for her and her guests to enjoy, but we want to take it up a notch to add more beauty, fragrance, and a little bit of pizzazz. In this corner, we have several challenges. First of all, this is a newly constructed home, and a look at the soil shows that there's a lot of construction material left in that soil, so we're going to need to deal with that. In addition, we've got a deck overhead and the lack of light. We'll talk more about that in the garden studio, and a lack of moisture. Those things together really reduce the microbial activity, and we end up with lousy soil. Now, overhangs and decks may be a problem for you, and so we'll talk about that. So we're really going to need to get started with the soil, but before we do that, we're going to need to take that wood mulch off before we amend the soil. The reason being, if we work the wood chips into the soil, the microorganisms that work on breaking it down and decomposing it will temporarily tie up the nitrogen and starve our plants. So I'm going to get busy raking and then get busy amending the soil. We've already tested the soil in this small area, and as you can see, I've added 2 inches of compost that I'm going to work into the soil. But I'm going to take advantage of this effort by doing a 2-for. I'm going to sprinkle my fertilizer so I can work it in as I work in the compost, and I'm adding it according to soil test recommendations. Luckily, I have just enough room to use a shovel so that I can work that compost into the root zone, improving it. So let me get busy digging, and then we'll get busy planting. I'm just getting started planting, but I want to talk about the plants that I've selected for this location. They're all shade tolerant, very important in this dark corner of the landscape, and I really considered color when I was selecting the plants. The backdrop will be the Cimicifuga, now named Actea, bugbane or snake root. This plant has beautiful purple foliage that's going to look nice against the light siding. The leaves are going to be about 4 feet tall, and you may think, well, it's blocking the view of the window. But really, we want to create a nice backdrop and a little bit of screening in here from the patio looking in, and when the homeowner looks out, she'll see a little bit of foliage, but when this plant's in bloom in the fall, she'll be looking through a field of white blooms, and it'll give her the feeling, the sense of being in the garden. In front of that, we're going to have the hakone, or Japanese forest grass, a nice contrast in color and texture. This forms mounds of linear leaves that'll just be beautiful. Both shade tolerant, and really the complementary colors will create a focal point. Yellow and purple are crossed on the artist's color wheel, making them complementary. Just like green and red at Christmas really gets your attention, the purple and the yellow do the same in this dark corner of the garden. Then we also replace the missing Japanese painted fern, and the purple, the Cimicifuga, echoes the purple in that fern. That helps to provide unity in the garden. You may want to take some of these ideas into your own landscape, repeating color and texture to create unity, and using complementary color to create a punch or a little bit of pizzazz. This is our first problem area. You can see it's not a very attractive corner, and in such a small space, it makes it difficult to hide. First of all, it needs to be accessible, so we can't put anything permanent. Second, we don't want to lose a lot of floor space in such a small area. We thought about a planter on the table, perhaps a screen with some planters, something to hide the view, allow accessibility, but not take up too much of the space for entertaining and relaxing. We decided to wait, think about it a bit, and look for the perfect solution rather than wasting time and energy on a temporary fix. This is another one of our problem areas. We're right here at the edge of the deck, and the water, when it rains, just rolls over the edge and pounds the soil. You can see it's been compacted and eroded. In fact, we had 3 hostas here at one time. 2 of them were washed away. We removed the other one to give it a home in a container. Now what do? Do we put some containers here? But I think the water will still be a problem. Perhaps we use some wall art, or maybe it's a dry riverbed. So when the rain does fall, it fills it up, and other times it's just a dry riverbed. Not sure what the best solution is at this point, so I want to take a little time, think about it, so we really work out something that's beautiful and functional. This was an overcrowded bed. We had a big grass by the gate that we moved to a new location, actually gave it to a friend. We had a Russian sage that was struggling that we moved out of here. So not only did we need to give more room for the existing plants that we've left, but we needed to change things out. You know, first glimmer, you'd think this was a nice sunny location between the fence and the deck. However, take a look at the vine. This climbing hydrangea is a great shade-tolerant plant, and it's doing well. So it's a little bit shadier than we thought. Also, as it grew, it shaded out the Russian sage, a sun-loving plant. So we moved it out. We'll use it in a planter later, and then we're going to try some more shade-tolerant plants. We're going to use the Simisa fuga or Actea that we used in the darker corner of the patio to see if it's getting enough shade. Now, one thing that we're going to do is monitor, because sometimes we find that some areas are shadier than we think or sunnier. If this one does great, we'll leave it. If not, we'll move it to a shadier spot. This is a good clue to you. You've probably had that problem. Thought an area was sunny and it was really shady. Monitor throughout the seasons and throughout the day. We're also going to use the hawthorn grass and use that complementary color again, the purple with the yellow and that variety of texture. Plus, it combines nicely with the coral bells that's here in the corner. That bold leaf with the nice linear leaves of the hawthorn grass worked well. We'll repeat the yellow in front, which is a nice bright color for a darker corner, using golden moneywort as a ground cover. This will just kind of creep through and make a nice backdrop for our other plants. And for a little bit of seasonal change, we'll try some pansies. Great in cool weather in the fall and the spring. Nice and cheery plants, the purple echoing. And the nice part about seasonal change out, it allows you to have a lot of variety even in a small space like this. In this corner, we're going to add some new dimensions, appealing to all 5 senses. You may remember we had this large grass right by the gate. It made it hard to go in and out, and it also overwhelmed many of the other plants. We removed that and allowed more sun to reach the clematis. It's great because, you know, clematis like their face in the sun, but they like their feet in the shade. So we're going to add a new grass when it becomes available to shade out the roots of the clematis. It will do much better when this plant really starts to take off. We also have this wonderful water feature. The sound is great, blocks out the noise of the neighborhood, and it's very calming. But the problem? The water spills over and it really drowned out the nearby plantings. So we're going to use some cannas as water plants in containers on either side of that feature. We've also added some fragrance and color. You notice our foreground is beautiful white plants. We've got alyssum. That white really gets your attention. If you've got a garden that you enjoy in the evening, like this one, you may want to add some white. It really brightens up that night garden, and the fragrance is unbelievable. We also have stock. It's a great flower, wonderful fragrant plant, and it attracts butterflies. But this is just the start of the fragrance. We've got peonies for spring bloom and for spring fragrance. We've got the gardenia that's going to bloom pretty soon with white flowers that echo the white of the flowers in the foreground. And we've got the lavender that has fragrant foliage and fragrant flowers as well. The purple geraniums will bloom soon, echoing the purple of the Siberian iris in the backdrop. Altogether, this is going to be a beautiful garden to enjoy throughout the season, both with your eyes, your nose. The fragrance is going to be wonderful. But before we get planting, we need to call. You want to call for utility locating service before you dig in. It's free. Give them advance notice. You'll save money and possibly save your life. Our last problem is a common one. We've got an air conditioner and a gas meter. Both create an eyesore in this small space and both need access. Now the homeowner tried to mask it, put a trellis with an annual vine. Unfortunately, the heat from the air conditioner killed the plant and the snow knocked over the trellis. So we decided to go for a more permanent solution, putting an arbor over top so your eye moves above the eyesore to look at a new focal point. We're going to look at a nice, beautiful vine for above and maybe some hanging baskets for added planting space and added interest. We're going to get busy finishing up our planting and take a look at what we've got so far. We've got everything planted that was available so far, but we still need to mulch. But doesn't it look great already? We added some seasonal annuals to fill in until our missing plants arrive, and then some additional annuals to hold the space until our perennials get larger. We're at a great point to take a break, go back to the garden studio, and look at the science behind great gardens. Lack of light is one of the biggest challenges in our urban garden and may also be an issue for you. Now keep in mind that the various aspects of light have other impacts on plants in their growth, flowering, and fruiting. We'll look at a few. Quantity, intensity, and duration, as we discussed previously, impact growth and also flowering. But light also is a factor when starting plants from seeds. Though most seeds don't need light to germinate, lettuce, ageratum, and impatiens do need light to sprout. So they're usually planted at or near the soil surface. Once sprouted, all seedlings need light to grow. Keep lights about 4 to 6 inches above seedlings to provide the needed light. Use reflected surfaces to maximize light that reaches the seedlings. Now, we don't have time to go into a lot of details about starting plants from seed, but fortunately, the back of most seed packets will help you with timing and growth information, temperature, and soil moisture. And be sure to remember to harden off your seedlings before moving them outdoors. Water is another critical resource plants need to grow. Growing plants are composed of up to about 90% water. Plants use water to create energy. Now remember our photosynthesis equation? It was part of the process, one of the resources needed. Plants also lose moisture through their pores in the leaves, known as stomata. Plants also need soil moisture to absorb nutrients from the potting soil, potting mix, or the soil they're growing in. Plants will also need water when transforming energy produced in photosynthesis into the food molecules or energy they need for growth and other plant resources. This is known as respiration. You may recognize this equation where the glucose they created in photosynthesis combines with oxygen to give you that energy, output carbon dioxide and water. That's how the plants use that energy for all their growth processes. And believe it or not, plants do sweat. Really, it's called transpiration. They lose moisture through their stomata. They open and close these to allow carbon dioxide and oxygen to be exchanged between the plant and the surrounding environment. But they also want to control this opening and closing to minimize moisture loss. Now, soil moisture, as I mentioned before, is necessary for plants to absorb nutrients from the soil or the growing medium. Water moves from areas of high concentrations to lower concentrations. So that's why the water moves, when there's plenty of moisture in the soil, from that soil into the plant. So we need moist soils to convey those nutrients as well from the soil into the plant. Now, most plants prefer moist and well-drained soils. Too much or too little water provided by nature or our watering practices can be detrimental to our plants. Let's test our soil to see how well it's drained before we start planting. This will help you decide if you need to amend the soil and maybe help in the selection of plants so you pick those that are best suited to the conditions of your soil. The test is a fairly easy one. Start by digging a hole about 1 foot deep. Fill it with water and allow it to drain completely. Then immediately refill that hole and measure the depth of the water with a ruler. Wait an hour and measure again. If it drains less than 1 inch per hour, it's poorly drained, indicating the site may stay too wet and wet for long periods during certain times of the year. You want to add organic matter to that soil to improve drainage and select plants that are tolerant of poorly drained soils. Things like swamp milkweed, Joe Pye weed, alders, and willows will be good choices. 1 to 6 inches of drainage per hour is really what's desirable for most plants. Now, soils that drain faster than 6 inches per hour have excessive drainage. We also want to add organic matter to these soils, but in this case to increase water holding ability. And we want to select plants that are tolerant of dry conditions and droughty soils. These would be things like potentilla, cacti, hens and chicks, and yuccas as well. Water needs also vary by the plant's age. New plantings have smaller roots, and these smaller roots can only pull up so much moisture in that little bit of soil. So we need to water more frequently as the plants become established. So we'll water the existing roots and keep the surrounding soil moist to encourage those roots to explore the surrounding soil as they develop. Established plants have much larger root systems and can pull moisture from a larger area, and that means they need less frequent watering. And water needs also vary by the type of plant. You remember, we found a lot of this information on the plant tag, so you always want to double check that as well. Many gardeners are looking for drought-tolerant plants suited to their climate. These plants require less moisture once established. That means less work for you, less money spent on watering. You'll have better-looking plants with much less effort. Here are a few examples you may recognize. As far as flowers go, moss rose is a very common drought-tolerant plant, great for full sun, but the flowers close up late in the day, so you'll want to use them in the garden or container where you can enjoy them during the bright hours of sunshine. Sunflowers are favorites of kids and gardeners of all ages. The seeds are edible for you, the birds, and of course the squirrels. They come in a variety of sizes now, from 2 feet to 15 feet or more tall, small or large size flower heads, and double petals, so lots of choices available. Zinnias are fun because you can start them from seed and get flowers pretty quickly. They come in a wide array of colors. Consider including them in containers or in-ground cutting gardens. They look great in the garden and even better in a vase. Butterfly weed is a wonderful plant for attracting monarch butterflies. The orange flowers look great when combined with purple or blue perennials. What I find about butterfly weed, I plant it where I want it, but it reseeds and grows best where it decides to grow, so I let it wander through my garden. Hens and chicks are low growing, great as ground covers, great in containers, sometimes planted in old shoes. Wonderful texture of foliage, but then also some unusual looking flowers you may enjoy. Succulents and cacti, of course, are the ultimate drought-tolerant plants. Northern gardeners can use them in containers, while those in warmer climates can add them to their landscape, keeping form and the subtleties of the color in mind as they plan their landscape. And shrubs, there are some to choose from, including potentilla, native to dry, rocky soils. This beauty does best in full sun with its yellow, white, or orange-colored flowers. Regular pruning will keep it looking its best. Cotoneaster is excellent for form, flowers, and fruit. The birds will eat the fruit, but watch out, the rabbits like to gnaw on the branches over winter. Blue Miss Spirea with its blue-gray foliage and its blue flowers late in the season really add a little bit of pizzazz to any landscape. That nice subtle texture combines nicely with yellow flowers and even white ones. Plus the bees love those beautiful blue flowers as much as you will. Witch hazel, there's many varieties to choose from. They bloom with fragrant flowers in fall, winter, or spring, an unusual time for most shrubs, making it a really nice addition to the landscape. Junipers are evergreens with prickly branches, making them great habitats for the birds, protecting them from their predators, but also good additions to your landscape. They come in upright and spreading and low-growing ground-hugging forms. And sumac is a wonderful but very assertive shrub that'll take it hot and dry. The red hairy berries are nice for winter interest and do make a nice sumac aid, so to speak, or tea. On the other hand, there are plants that prefer or even require moist soil conditions. You may recognize a few of these moisture-loving flowers. Astilbe is a perennial that likes the shade but must have moist soil conditions. The nice ferny leaves look good all season, and the plants grow anywhere from 1 foot to 4 foot tall, making them very versatile in the landscape. Cardinal flower has bright red flowers that are great for attracting hummingbirds. Tolerant of wet soil, this perennial may be a little tricky to use, so give it a try. If you don't succeed at first, that's okay. Try it again. Marsh marigold is an early spring bloomer that tolerates spring floods and a little bit drier soils the rest of the year. The leaves look great all season, and those bright yellow flowers are sure to brighten up the spring landscape. And elephant ears you may know from growing in containers, but they'll also grow in water gardens or moister areas in the landscape. Their big, bold leaves are sure to get your attention no matter what your garden design. Now here are a few shrubs you might recognize and try in wetter areas. Red twig dogwood with their red stems brighten the winter landscape, creamy flowers, berries the birds like, and good fall color. Nice for season interest. Elderberry is more than just for making wine. The berries are edible for you and the birds. They do make great wine, jams, and jellies, but the shrub is excellent for wet areas. Flowers followed by the fruit and nice-looking foliage. Lots of good new varieties out there that are much more ornamental. Select a native alder, one that won't take over and be invasive in your area, but these fast-growing trees are very moisture tolerant, often colonize, so they make a great stand relatively fast. And gray dogwood does the same thing, a large shrub with gray stems that looks great in the winter landscape. Nice flowers followed by white berries the birds love and good fall color, but give it room to grow. It really will kind of take over a corner of your landscape, but that's great if you have a large wet area to fill. Now, the growing conditions can also influence how much and how often our plants will need watering. For example, the more light you have, the more frequently you need to water. The warmer or higher the temperatures, the more often you need to water. Fast-draining soils also need to be watered more frequently. Now, the quantity and frequency of watering is critical to plant health, and a common mistake gardeners make is providing plants with frequent and shallow watering. I call it the one-drink method. You come home from work and you water everything in your landscape, the trees, the shrubs, the lawn, the vegetables, the flowers, everything in the time it takes to drink your beverage. You go back on inside and feel pretty good about what you did. Unfortunately, what you're doing is you're encouraging shallow roots that need to be watered every day. So if you go on vacation or miss a watering, the plant wilts, and over time, it can even kill them. Over and under watering can result in the same symptoms, and that certainly makes it difficult for you to know how to adjust your care. Some of the things we may see are yellowing leaves, brown spots, browning leaves, and that can be too much or not enough water. When there's too much water in the soil, it fills up all the pore space for oxygen, so the plants are unable to take up the water that they need, resulting in drought-like symptoms. If the soils don't have water, then obviously there's no water for the plants to take up. Again, these type of symptoms. And in both cases I mentioned, not only will you have yellowing and scorching like we saw, but occasionally wilting. Root rot, or insects and diseases that damage the roots, reduces the root size. And what that means is you have fewer roots to absorb moisture. And again, you may see some problems with drought stress and lack of water, resulting in the damage we saw. Now, I've pointed out the moisture stress on this plant, and a closer look reveals it's in a very tiny pot. And actually, this pot's way too small for this plant. Not enough potting mix to hold the moisture the plant needs, not enough room for more roots to form. So again, we're limiting the plant's ability to take up the moisture it needs. The other problem we see with dracaenas, like this, Thai plants, prayer plants, and spider plants are brown tips, and you may notice a few small brown tips on the leaves. That's due to the fluoride and the chlorine in the water that we often see in areas where you're using treated water to water your plants. What happens is those chemicals concentrate and burn the leaf tips. So what's your solution? Distilled water. I like to use water from my dehumidifier or your air conditioner to water plants. But if you do use water, treated water, then make sure you keep the soil just slightly moist. Not too wet, but slightly moist to dilute those chemicals, and you'll avoid the brown tips on your plants. The temperature of the water matters for many plants. Members of the African violet family don't tolerate cold temperatures on their leaves. This charita has signs of damage. The owner watered from the top with cold water. So in this case, we always want to use room temperature water, or you may read about watering plants from below, and that's to avoid cold water on the leaves and the damage. Now you can see the plant will survive, it just doesn't look good. And a lot of the reason we garden is for good-looking plants. Now, wet plants can also be a problem when you have the leaves wet. You may see some fungal disease. Begonias are a great example. If you take a close look at these leaves, you can see some gray substance from downy mildew. Wet foliage can lead to bacterial and fungal disease problems. So, water the soil. Better water-wise practicing, you'll avoid diseases and you'll waste less water that way too. So just a couple of tips of things you need to keep in mind when watering plants. It's just not about soil moisture. Well, as you can see, if we follow these strategies, you can actually reduce your workload. Watering thoroughly and less frequently means you'll establish good deep roots that need less attention from you. And if you match your plants to the environment, you'll also reduce your needs, whether it's sunlight conditions or soil conditions. And if you pick plants that thrive in the normal, whatever that is for your area, and natural rainfall, you won't need to do supplemental watering except during extended drought. Again, saving you time and money. But in general, once those plants are established, you should be just fine, and nature will take care of it. Now, as we learned earlier, matching the plants to the soil type also means healthier plants and less work for us. So use moisture lovers in poor draining soils, some of those I mentioned earlier, and also use drought-tolerant plants in fast draining soil. Now, there's always a lot more to learn, but I think that's enough to guide us in amending the soil and planting a new design at our urban garden. Let's take a look at the bed under the tree in front to see how the right plants in the right place do make the difference. Remember the hostas and ferns that were struggling under this honey locust tree? Though there was some shade, the hot afternoon sun and the reflected heat and light from the nearby concrete really made them struggle, and they scorched. We decided to replace them with coral bells. They're shade and sun tolerant and drought tolerant, so they're able to better compete with the tree roots that are going to absorb those water and nutrients. So we've planted these a little closer than you'd expect because these plants are going to slowly fill in, so we wanted to give them a head start. We've planted in the existing soil because as little as an inch of soil can kill certain trees, and we don't want to kill the trees for the sake of the planting. Notice we've used a mix of colors here to create a beautiful tapestry under this tree. I'm going to show you the secret to success of planting under a tree. We've dug the hole slightly wider than the container and the root ball. We're going to add some compost to the existing soil just in the area we're planting. And also a little bit of low nitrogen, slow release fertilizer. It won't burn our young transplant, but help provide nutrients over a long period of time. Carefully slide the plant out of the pot, loosen the roots, and make sure when we set it in the hole that those roots will be covered, and with coral bells, the crown slightly below the soil surface. Then backfill. We want to tamp gently to make sure we've got no air pockets and good root to soil contact. We are going to mulch and water in, and be sure that we remove any of the flowers so that all the energy goes into forming roots, not flowers and seeds. We want to make sure we water often enough to keep those roots nice and moist, and then we'll have a beautiful planting bed in the shade of this honey locust tree. Now you know why. Right plant, right purpose, right place, and right look makes a difference. In the next 2 sessions, we'll help you keep your garden beautiful and blooming throughout the season. Plus, we'll look at seasonal challenges from bugs to mildew and solutions to some of the tougher design challenges. See you then.